The sitting is resumed. Senator Maladou.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for recognizing me. Morning, fellow senators. Mr. President, you know my style. I do not plan to spend a long time on these matters. I will speak quickly and to the point. It is in certain matters. Thank you. I must say, as I sat here yesterday, sir, I felt like if global warming had an effect on the Senate, because I've been in this chamber now for almost 26 months, and I have not seen such heat as I did yesterday, sir. But to some extent, it was refreshing, and I enjoyed the robust debate. In my comments regarding the appropriation bill, sir, I want to start out by echoing some of the things that I've heard said so far, some of the things I like said. I liked Senator Blackman's comment about face it, fix it. That was you. Thank you, Senator Cummins, for correcting me. I liked the comment from you, Senator Cummins, about we need to have conversations around what we pay for and what we get. I like the conversation around we must be the most competitive in the region and the world. And that's the way we were looking at this economy. I would also like to say that I agree on the comments on education, which I think I can attribute to Senator Watson. My personal experience was that in 1975, I went into Arson College as a young boy, and 40 years almost to the day, I went back with my eldest son, and I was disappointed that not much had changed. There certainly is a real need for the change in the education. I got an extremely good education there, government education, starting in 1975. But I cannot say, and I think I got a world-class education, sir, but I cannot say today that the same is true. And that's not a criticism of that particular institution, but it's a criticism of our education system and needing reform. So I agree with all of those things. Regarding the appropriations bill and what I listened to in the other place, sir, I felt like perhaps I would give an analogy that Barbados is a yacht that has come through a storm where the boat was not ready to face the storm. We didn't even know what the storm was. But this particular budget was more about a steady hand on the tiller, sir. Small course corrections. The waters are calmer. The economy is firing. Lots of things are going well. And therefore, there was no big surprises, no big course corrections that one would normally see. But I will agree that this then is a time that we have an opportunity, just as the leader of government business, Senator Cummins said, to look at the long-term issues in our economy. In this time of calm, let us look to the more structural changes. We don't need to tweak here and there. Clearly, there are some big issues like education, but there are other things which perhaps I will focus on. But before I get to those, I want to make a couple of comments, sir, use my time. And I know that you would be disappointed with me if I didn't start with this one. I would like to speak to the specific comments, proposals made by the Prime Minister in the appropriation bill when she spoke of the cost of a real estate transaction, sir. First of all, let me say that the Prime Minister is 100% correct. In her speech in that other place, she spoke about the cumbersome nature, the cost, the length of time to do transactions. She spoke of the process, she spoke of the costs. As I said, I'm in total agreement with these statements. I have been practicing in this area, sir, as you know, for almost 30 years. In fact, I grew up in a business or a family that started out as an employee and eventually made its way to ownership of a real estate business. So all my life I've been around it. I lead a real estate practice that has 5 different offices around this region. We are part of a global network. I see transactions not just in Barbados or in Trinidad or Grenada, I see them in the United Kingdom, in the USA. And I can confirm that in Barbados, we have a costly, cumbersome process that affects our ability to grow in that area. I have a perspective on this. But sir, when I actually read what was proposed, or I shouldn't say read, at the time I was listening intently, I think on the radio, at that point I was in my car, sir, I heard the Prime Minister say that she was proposing that they convene a colloquium. But sir, my focus was math, physics and chemistry at A-levels, and I was never so good with English, so I must admit that at first I misunderstood colloquium. I thought when the Prime Minister said that there was going to be a colloquium between the Attorney General and the Minister of Housing, I thought she said Coliseum. So I thought we were actually going to have the lawyers and the housing people in the Coliseum having a war and there was going to be bloodshed. But you know, sir, I took the time then when I got home to get out the dictionary and read what a colloquium was. And then I was disappointed, sir, because I looked it up and I found out that a colloquium is, and I quote here from Webster's dictionary, an academic meeting at which specialists deliver addresses on a topic or on related topics and then answer questions related to them. Sound like a talk shop to me. So I didn't like this whole colloquium thing, but you know that's not my style. So I was disappointed in that. Because frankly speaking, sir, I thought the Prime Minister identified the issue, identified the causes, and identified the solutions all in the appropriations bill. So I didn't see the need for this colloquium. I did like the idea if it was going to be in a Coliseum, as I said, but the colloquium thing I didn't necessarily, but I will go along with it because I understand that not everyone practices in this area, not everyone perhaps has a full understanding of the challenges, and therefore it would be useful to flesh out everything. In the Prime Minister's comments on this subject, what was said, the 2 problems that we were going to identify and are we going to solve was the time and the cost in the transaction. And what could be done immediately is that in order to reduce some of the costs from this, the legal process could be shorter if for the sale of state-owned properties, the state guaranteed the title, which meant that the due diligence that the attorneys would normally want to have a larger fee for, because they do have to do a lot of work given this cumbersome process, that would be out of it. And that would also make it a lot easier for the banks to lend because they would know that they have a good title to rely on. Sir, this doesn't need to only apply to state transactions. In a few minutes, I will explain how the exact same solution which can apply to state properties can apply to private properties. And we could solve this problem, which is indeed a problem. Let's identify what the problem is. As I said, the Prime Minister pointed to 2 areas within the process of transferring property, transferring land, selling land. Talked about cost and we talked about process. In terms of the costs, sir, let's be clear, are really in three areas. There are state costs, which are regulatory costs, and those are stamp duty, transfer tax, and any VAT being paid on fees. That's what, in every transaction, the government of Barbados collects. Secondly, there's a group of costs, legal fees. And I know I'm surrounded by lawyers, and I really do need a coat of armor today by the time I finish this section. Because in the transfer of property, we have lawyers on the seller side, we have lawyers on the buyer's side, and quite often we have lawyers for the mortgagee. In general, if it is a parcel of land in Barbados, a small parcel of land, and there's a mortgage involved, let's say it's a 60% loan-to-value mortgage, you're going to have about 3.5% of the cost will be in legal fees, about 5.5% of the cost in that transaction will be in state costs. In terms of real estate fees, sir, I think the first point I want to make on this is that not every transaction needs to have a real estate agent. In fact, I think amongst just the few of us here in this room, we may well know of a transaction where you have a property or a family member had a property. They may choose to have a real estate agent or not. You don't have to have a real estate. No, you have to pay your tax to government, and you have to have a lawyer to do a conveyance so as to perfect the transfer of that title. But a real estate agent, you do not need. Real estate agent fees in Barbados today are anywhere from 0 to about 4%. When I first joined the market some years ago, it was on average somewhere around 4.5%. We talked about 5% fees. Today that does not happen. Today the average in the market is likely in the 3.5% range, is likely where it is. But it's hard to tell because we don't know how many transactions are done without agents. Many developers now have their own in-house agents, they sell on their own. So the main point though is that when we talk about the costs, the state costs are fixed and the legal fees are legislated. And now we're going to talk, sir, about legislation of the legal fees, which is what the Prime Minister referred to. Sir, the Legal Professions Act, Cap 370A, which I believe in effect forms the Barbados Bar Association, has a judicial council as part of it. And in that judicial council, they have something called the remuneration of non-contentious matters. And that sets a scale of fee, which has a minimum fee for real estate transactions. That came about in 1997. Sir, in 2007, the Fair Trading Commission was asked to look at this scale of fees. And they concluded in their document of 2007 and said that they formally recommend that amendment to the Legal Professions Act to make the schedule a reference only. That was in 2007, sir. Since 2007, nothing has changed. It is still a minimum fee, and it is legislated. And perhaps that is why the Bar Association and its members vigorously defend the scale, because at the end of the day, it is the law. The transfer tax, as I mentioned before, sir, is a graduated tax if in fact you are selling an improved property as opposed to a parcel of land. It's a graduated tax. The stamp duty is fixed. So you have a situation where you have fixed taxes going to government on the sale of properties. You have a legislated fee for the attorneys, and you may or may not have a real estate fee, or you may or may not have a mortgage to deal with. As I said, sir, in all of that cost of the transaction on real estate, the fees, the stamp duty, the transfer tax, the VAT, the legislated legal fees, they're all fixed fees. The real estate agent fee, at the end of the day, is negotiated in the private market, and it can be zero, as I said. It could be as high as you want it to be. On average, I would tell you today, it's somewhere, on average across the industry, about 3.5%. But you see transactions at the smaller end at 4 to 4.5%. You see transactions at the lower end at lower than that. So every day of the week, every week of the year, every month of it, I see real estate agents competing. You go to one and you say, I got a house for sale, what's your terms? They'll tell you what their terms might be. You don't like those terms, you go to another. Eventually you find one who has some terms that you're happy with. And the agents compete. To be an agent in Barbados, a real estate agent, you can go down to the registrar. I think the fee is $300. I apologize, sir, that my office would pay that fee. It used to be $250. I think it is now $300. And then you are a real estate agent, sir. There's no training. There's no education. There's no requirement for professional indemnity insurance. You don't need to have an officer. You don't need any of those things. You're a real estate agent. Now, larger firms may have education plans. They may have hiring schemes. They may have professional indemnity insurance. They may have health insurance for their employees. They may have pensions. They may have training plans. They may have marketing budgets. They may have websites, whatever it might be. But as an individual, as an owner, when you are choosing to sell a property, you can choose what level of service you want. In fact, what you can do, sir, is you can take your property, take a few pictures on your phone. Your phone has a very good camera. Take a picture of your plot plan and upload it to any number of websites that you have in Barbados and offer your property yourself, privately, and pay no agent for it. And that's no problem, that's competition. That's the world I live in. That's the world the vast majority of Barbados professionals live in. A competitive world where the fees are set by the market. And that's the world, frankly, sir, that I like. But let's go back then to what the Prime Minister said. And the Prime Minister said, and she asked the question, I may paraphrase here, is it reasonable that the lawyers regulate themselves and set their fees via legislation? Sir, I think that was a rhetorical question. I think we all know what the answer is to that. And I think we all know what the FTC's answer was to that. But sir, I want to save this chamber, this government, this legislature a lot of trouble. Before I get there though, I want to be clear. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think there should be any schedule of fees for the conveyance of property. I think it should be open market, compete, just as every other profession can do. Architects can do it, and doctors can do it, and engineers and surveyors and Kadooment bands can do it, and everybody can do it. Why do we need legislation for it? But we do have legislation, and so as to fix this quickly, sir, I'm going to give you a solution that we can deal with today. And if the clerk has a few minutes, he might be able to do it for me. Without going to the colloquium, which, as I said before, I now understand what it is, and maybe it will have value to bring everybody up to the common understanding. But all we need to do, sir, is to change 2 letters in 1 sentence, and we will fix this problem. I mean 2 letters in 1 word in 1 sentence, sir. The wording today says that there is a minimum scale for fees. Sir, the word minimum is M-I-N-I-M-U-M. I propose that we change the I and the N in minimum to an A and an X, and we make it a maximum fee. All we need to do, sir, is change 2 words. That is the maximum fee. Compete. Go right ahead and compete, but that's the maximum fee that you have. Change 2 letters, problem solved. We don't need to do anything else. We just fix it. As I said before, sir, as you heard me say very clearly, I won't think there should be any scale at all. But if there's going to be a scale, let's change the 2 letters, and let's have a maximum fee and not a minimum fee, sir. So in terms of the summary of the real estate, as I said, going to a state guaranteed title for state-owned properties can be extended into the private sector. We can do this by offering title insurance so that when you are buying a property, you are insured in case there is an underlying defect in that property. And in the failure of that insurance, you can actually go back to state guaranteed title. This is proven all around the world. It's a way of doing things. It's a way of reducing this process down. If we had registered title, title insurance, state guarantee as a last resort on it, let the lawyers compete just as everyone else competes in the market onto their time. And let's not think that that's going to take any food off of anyone's table, sir. The truth is that many of the lawyers today avoid the conversation with the Bar Association, and they do compete, because I see it. I know it. As it stands today, what they're faced with is they can either work for free or they can work for the minimum scale. So what we will do is you will find ways to work for free and charge you in other ways for other things so that you get around this problem that is there. That is the reality, sir, of how it goes on. So, in summary, on the real estate section, as I said, I was going to speak on that one because you would expect me to. I think that it was an excellent proposal. It's a good start, and I think that we can very quickly get to where the appropriations bill and the proposal that was in there as to how to take some of the inefficiency and the cost and on a path to growth where we can speed up these real estate transactions. Sir, we now turn just to construction and management for a second. Again, within the appropriations bill, there is a significant amount of money that needs to be spent on maintaining government buildings, schools, other things. Sir, my concern, and remember I premised my remarks in saying that we need to look structurally long-term at where we're going with this. But sir, every September, and I can't remember the last September that I have not heard of a government school not opening because the maintenance or the building that was meant to be done over this summer is not yet quite ready, sir. We've all heard this over and over again, and this is not a matter for this government. This is governance I'm talking about. This is years of it. We have a problem. We are not good at construction and building management as a government side of it. We are not good at it. And you don't need to look too far to see evidence of that. Have you heard of a private school or a private secondary or primary school not opening in September? Have you heard of a private building being closed because it is a sick building? I stand corrected. There must be some examples of it. But sir, it is not the norm. And what worries me is that some things that we do in government, we are not well suited to do. We are better off suited in the business community, the man out there having them do these things for us. Sir, I would turn my comments now to healthcare. And I believe the minister responsible for healthcare is taking his seat, I think that's correct, Senator Walker. Turning my attention to healthcare for a second. Just a couple of comments. My comments would be on dengue, if I can say it right, because I'm not sure if it's dengue, I'm not sure how to say it, to be quite honest. I got confused by the word. Dengue? Dengue, are we going to go with dengue today? I have not seen the official statistics, sir, this particular last 3 or 4 months. But what I can tell you is my experience, both in the place I work with family members and with the tourists staying in the villas for which I am responsible. There has been a significant epidemic of dengue, it appears, this year. As I say, I don't have the official statistics. I've seen a few things in the paper. And it has a real problem for us, both in staff sickness, because when you get dengue, and I've unfortunately had it once, I know other people who've had it more than that, it is debilitating. It is not, I have a cold, I'm going to work through it and do an email or something. When you have a staff member who is off with dengue, they go dark. for 4, 5, 6, 7 days. You just simply, it's a debilitating disease. Luckily, the vast majority of people recover from it. The other problem, though, that we have is the number of people that I saw, sir, visitors, sick. The profile of visitors to Barbados over the years has been an older person. And when we have older people in Barbados, and we have them right at the end of our rainy season from December, January, February, and they are getting dengue, it is very difficult. It's difficult on the healthcare system. It's difficult on the healthcare providers. I would be wrong if I could tell you, I could count how many people, visitors we had in villas this year, we had to send doctors out to and put them on IVs and so on. This is a tough disease, and it is not good for the image of Barbados. So, sir, our current approach, and this is why I wanted to make sure that I got the attention of Senator Walker, our current approach, and perhaps it's the best that we could do at the time, is fogging. That's how we deal with dengue. And of course, the Ministry of Health makes sure that we don't have receptacles or catching water, and there are lots of debushing, there are lots of other activities. But a lot of time is spent on fogging. I am concerned, sir, that fogging is generally bad for the environment. It is indiscriminate in what it affects. It doesn't only affect mosquitoes, it affects whether you have a sheep or a chicken or a child running around or whoever it might be. And it is people keeping bees. Thank you, sir. Thank you. It might affect them as well. And it is not effective because if you read about it, the fogging kills the adults. The adult Aedes aegypti mosquito. I'm no expert on this. I may get the words wrong again. But it doesn't kill the larvae. So, sir, I am only suggesting in my comments that in the appropriations budget, I hope that we could find some time, some money, to perhaps look at some other solutions. I saw one that someone had suggested in a written a letter in a newspaper, an overseas guest. I know I've passed it on to the Ministry of Health. I hope they're looking into it, and I believe that there are others. And these solutions are, at the end of the day, sir, mosquitoes do not migrate. Barbados, one of the great things, you remember going into COVID, we were this small island, we could shut down our borders. Mosquitoes do not migrate to Barbados on their own. They might come here on a ship or on a plane, or they might come, in fact, someone who's already infected with dengue doesn't know it, comes here, and then the mosquito transmits it. So, but what we can do, because of our small shores, is there are solutions where the adult mosquito is rendered infertile and is unable to reproduce. And we have a real opportunity to wipe out dengue in Barbados, I believe, and I do hope that some time and effort and some money will be spent on an alternative solution to fogging. COVID, sir. 4 simple paragraphs. That will probably cause me some trouble. Sir, COVID and the aftermath of it. I remember a number of times when we were in the heart of this, and this government did a heck of a job with it, and many people in the front lines did as good as could be done and much better than many other countries. But one of the things that was being said at the time, and I think it was our Prime Minister at the time said, we do not want, or maybe it was the Attorney General, do not make criminals out of innocent people. We were passing restrictions and doing certain things that we knew we had to do for the health, but do not make criminals out of innocent people. And I premise my remarks then to look at what it seems to be happening now. Employers who followed the COVID-19 directives and sought to keep the tourism market and others open are under threat from the very employees who they sought to protect. It is my belief that government should come out and openly support the employers who implemented these policies and confirm that such policies were necessary, were reasonable, and are not discriminatory. We have a case that has been heard and a ruling has been given that worries me. I won't go into the details of it here, sir, but it is a public record. So I go as far as to say that in cleaning up the legacy of COVID-19, which we all want to put behind us, and as I said, we did a fantastic job as a country, as a government, as a Ministry of Health, as a doctors, the tourism workers, everyone did a fantastic job on it, did better than most countries in the world. We should consider legislation that will protect the employers who simply followed the directives and did what they were asked. It should not now be the subject of employment right tribunal or whatever on mandatory testing or whatever it might be. That needs to be looked at carefully, and let us put the legacy of COVID behind us. If that is not done, sir, what happens the next time the government, whatever government that might be, has a directive to give to employers, and the employer follows that directive? Are they going to be susceptible to some lawsuit, to some matter afterwards, if they follow the rightful directive of the then government? We must fix that, sir. If not, you open it up for us, for all Barbadians, to ignore the directives because you're leaving us vulnerable to a later issue. Sir, I'm not sure how much time I have, sir. Oh, excellent. I only have 2 more things. Thank you. Okay, sir. I have a big skip on this one, but I won't skip on it. Transportation, sir, before I get to my substantive point about the actual changes in the how we do business. Transportation. Transportation in Barbados, and I didn't need any better example than just this morning at 9:30 trying to get here, sir, to find that Broad Street was closed. We suffer with congestion, sir, in a serious way, and it will get worse. From what I can see, the economy is doing well. It will continue to do well. I would say my crystal ball says 2 to 3 years. We're going to do very well unless something changes. And I see significant projects. We've heard a lot about them around the place, whether that be residential, commercial, tourism, infrastructure projects. All of that is going to lead to more and more congestion, sir. Congestion is a productivity problem. I've heard fellow senators around the room today, we all talked about our nightmare of travel today. We've got to deal with the congestion issues. Having said that, I want to congratulate the government on the excellent work on the road works that is going on now. I think that it was long overdue, and it certainly is making a difference to both the experience of us as Barbadians here. It makes a big difference with the cost of transportation, tires, suspension, wear and tear on your vehicles, all of these things. Everyone benefits by it. But to have a smooth road to sit on for 20 minutes in traffic is what the problem I'm talking about. I'm not talking about smooth roads, right? I'm talking about congestion. And so we have had the biggest tourist season, I believe. I haven't seen the final statistics, but I think when it does come out, it's probably going to be the biggest tourist season we've ever had. So again, more congestion, a lot more going on. Barbados, at the end of the day, to me, sir, is a small city, and we need a reliable public transportation system. Today, we do not have that. So I have a radical idea, sir. You know, I always get into trouble, so it's another day to get into trouble. So here's my solution. Let us make it, it's legal, sir, yes, always. Sir, my solution for transportation is to make it free. I think it should be free for everyone, no matter who. If you are in Barbados, you can travel on the bus for free. We need to find some way to get people to change their culture of driving everywhere. And we need to find a reliable, clean, safe public transportation that we can all use. Sir, on page 208 to 210 of the appropriations bill, I see the appropriations for the Transport Authority. Now, I would imagine that that is 1 year's operation and capital costs. I can't figure it all out, but it's totals, when I add the 3 categories together, sir, it adds to 17 million Barbados dollars per annum. Now, of course, I would imagine that's the subsidy, I think they call it, that goes to the Transport Board. So the Transport Board, of course, has its own revenue. So it may well be that the Transport Board, I don't know, I haven't seen, may have $17 million in bus fares that it collects. So added to the $17 million in subsidy means it's a $34 million business. I don't actually know. But pages 208 to 210, I see you're looking, 208 to 210 is where I got it from. So I ask and I challenge the government, can we rethink public transportation with a goal to reduce congestion, make it safe and reliable, improve productivity for everyone, and I mean everyone on the shores of Barbados. I can tell you that there are some countries in the world that when I travel to them, at the airport, you go to a kiosk and you're given a little card. If you've had occasion to travel to Geneva and other parts of the world, you can buy a card and you travel freely on the public transportation. Now, of course, I know that this is a loss of revenue, and I know that taxi drivers, car rental companies, I know that it has an impact, but I just want us to rethink transportation, recognizing the problem that we have with congestion, unless it is our intention to spend millions and millions of dollars more in a road infrastructure in what is effectively a very small city with a lot of competing land uses. Perhaps a colloquium on that subject would be useful, because I am not particularly an expert. So, sir, I now would move, as I said at the beginning, that I wanted to make some comments really about the longer term. Those are the comments first directly related to items in the appropriation bill. I'd like to make some broad comments about government. And I want to make it clear again, I am not speaking of today's government, to the individuals who are sitting in the positions of minister or whatever within the government. I'm referring to governance in Barbados and what do we want out of it? What's the structure that we want? I'm talking about structural matters, sir, not day-to-day policies. Often, sir, we talk about our aspirations of Singapore. I've heard that many times here and other places. And you have to ask yourself, what's really the type of economy that they have and what we have? And there's some similarities in various things. But it comes down to competition, comes down to a competitive economy. And I think so, sir, that we need to think about the areas where we need to make our economy competitive for generations to come. What structure will that take? But, sir, before I go there, I want to give a story. And I'm a little bit fearful of giving this story when I have the Reverend Morris over here to my left, and I have the Reverend Rogers here to my right. Because this is going to be a story about the absence of God, sir. The absence of God. So, sir, there's a story that goes like this. It says that there were these people who were talking together, and some were religious people and some were scientists. And the question that was posed to them was that if everything in the world has been made by God, and there's evil in this world and there's good in this world, and that man is a reflection of God, therefore God must in some ways be evil as well. And this was a bit of a conundrum there. And funny enough, it was a scientist who decided to answer this question. He challenged one of the people and says, so tell me something, sir. Cold, feeling of cold, is that something real for you? And the person's response was, of course, yeah, cold is something real. To which the scientist responded and said, no, cold is nothing. Cold is not real at all. Cold is simply the absence of heat. So the more heat you take away, which is what you actually measure, the more cold you feel. But cold is the absence of heat. He went on and asked the same person, sir, tell me about darkness. Is darkness real? Of course, the person said, yeah, it's dark, darkness is real. He said, no, darkness is not. Darkness is simply the absence of light. So the measurement of how dark something is the measurement of how the little light there really is. So, sir, he then concluded and said, when you say that evil was created by God, I say to you that evil is the absence of good. And without good, there is evil. And depending on what religion you might follow and what God you may say God, or you may say Allah, or you may say Jah, it applies to everyone. The absence of good is evil. Evil in and of its own does not need to be created. That's how it comes about. And I say that to you, sir, because now I'm going to talk to you about the F word, sir. I'm very, very sorry, but we need to talk about facilitation. F word, facilitation. And then, sir, I'm unfortunately going to have to speak a little bit about the C word, concessions. So, sir, a great deal of energy and discussion has been going into the concept of business facilitation as a pathway to growth in the Barbados economy. I know I have been part of those discussions for the last year, and it is a problem. And I heard Senator Cummins speak about it in her remarks, and the need for change and facilitation comes up all over the place. I believe, frankly, that facilitation is the natural state of a government. The natural state that we should find government in is in a state of facilitation. We should not have to create facilitation. And the problem is, so before I get there, it was Senator Blackman who at the time in his presentation, and I will get this attributed correctly, who said that we need to transition to a can-do from a can't-do government. He said so. Sir, when I look up the definition of facilitation, it says to me that it is the act of assisting or making easier the progress or improvement of something. The act of assisting or making easier the progress or improvement of something. Sir, that's one of the fundamental definitions that I carry around as the role of government, is to do that which collectively we would like the country to do, is to bring order. We can work together for the common good, enforce the rules that we've collectively agreed on. I will freely admit that there are lots of luminaries and who experts in governments. I am only a layman in this matter. But that's how we see government. We want government to protect and care for those who cannot protect for themselves. We want a caring government. Facilitation, sir, is the natural order of government. We should not have to seek it out. We shouldn't have to have a facilitation unit. Sir, I didn't coin these terms, but I believe it has certainly been attributed to the Right Honourable, excellent, if I don't get it right, Errol Barrow. He believed that he was the one who coined this term about the army of occupation. I believe that there's been another term coined in recent years about malicious compliance. But like the answer to what is darkness, which is the absence of light, and like the answer to what is cold, which is the absence of heat, the absence of facilitation is what we call today frustration. Frustration, and I've heard everyone around here at different times talk about it. If our natural state today is frustrated with every process that we do, then of course you need facilitation. You need facilitation to remove the frustration, which has become our natural state. This, sir, as I say, is a structural issue. We need a reset in our form of governance. I remind again all who is listening, who may be coming in later on this conversation, I am not speaking of today's government, nor yesterday, or the day before, or 10 years ago. I'm talking about a systemic issue of governance that we need to look at, and we have the opportunity to change. Our natural state needs to move to one of facilitation so people can get on with their lives in peace and harmony and not be frustrated at every turn. And we know we can do it, sir. I spoke more than a year ago in here about the extremely pleasant interaction that all Barbadians and foreigners today have with our immigration department. That is truly in the natural state of facilitation. What do you want to get done? How can I help? And boy, can they get things done today. And our immigration in Barbados and our passport control at the airport is better than first world nations around this world. I get to travel a lot and they're excellent. And our online system that came about is one of the things through COVID and other things, excellent. Sorry, I had occasion to go down to Trinidad and Tobago, my office. Oh dear. Well, thankfully, one of the small privileges that we get as a senator is a diplomatic passport, because otherwise the form and the hours that I would have spent just as a CARICOM national to get into Trinidad and Tobago, and I don't want to upset them because I'm sure that they're on the road to facilitating that as well. But it is, we're like years ahead, not just of our Caribbean neighbours, but of many first world countries, sir. But we also know where we get it wrong. And some of them have been mentioned in here before. When I said the C word, which of course was concessions, I heard someone say kaipo. So we know, and it has been identified, and I know that the minister is working diligently on it, and I know that there have been reports and so on, and there's been mentions of town planning before, and the frustrations there, and there's mentions of the licensing authority, and there's ample evidence to go around to agree that we are in a state of frustration and not in facilitation. So let me change my tack then, sir, to concessions. And sir, you know I've spoken on this before, but there was a lot on concessions in the appropriations bill. In fact, just several weeks ago, we passed some legislation in here to do with labour clauses, which fundamentally said, if you are going to get a concession from the government of Barbados, you must follow good labour practices. No one would think that is an unreasonable position to take. That's a very reasonable position to take. Hence, the bill passed. The PM has signalled that we need to go even further, not just in that particular industry, because that one was very much related to tourism and various things. But we need to look at all the concessions that have been granted in Barbados over all of these years, and we have to go back to it and we have to say, do you still qualify? Because when you originally asked for it, you said you were going to do A, B, and C. Are you really doing it? Again, very, very reasonable thing to do, because I would think that we would all agree, sir, that someone who is benefiting from a concession but is not keeping their side of the bargain should not get to keep that concession. Very, very reasonable. Unfortunately, though, we now have to build a whole big set of rules and probably an enforcement department and probably, as you can see, 60 days to do this and 30 days to do that and 90 days to do that. We got to build a whole set of other bureaucracy now around this. It's a whole new set of rules that have to be monitored. But concessions in and of themselves, sir, are not a bad thing. They're used by governments around the globe when they want to encourage particular areas of an economy. In fact, sir, maybe 25 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, I remember coming across for the first time the Special Development Areas Act, SDA. And that's a good example of concessions. And I actually have no idea, because I'm government agnostic. I don't know which government brought it in. Someone can claim it later on. But the SDA was a good piece of legislation that said, we have a problem in Roebuck Street and Church Village. We need investment there. We have a problem in St. Lawrence Gap. We need something there. We got a problem down in Spikestown. We need some more people to invest in there. So it set out to create areas where it would be, you could encourage businesses to invest because it was easier, more lucrative, more profitable under these concessions. Great idea. Problem is that as concessions have developed in Barbados, and as I have said before, those individual geographical areas no longer really apply. In fact, some of the concessions offered under the SDA are much more or much less attractive than concessions offered other places. So what you were hoping to achieve with it, which was a very good idea 25, 27 years ago, is not there. And in fact, what we have today is, as I have said in this chamber before, sir, I am not aware of any significant investment in education, construction, sports development, tourism, manufacturing, retailing, housing. Let's keep going on. That has not received concessions for the last 20 years. If you're going to do a big project in Barbados, you'll apply for concessions. And ultimately, or maybe not, but most often than not, if it's a viable project, it will be granted. So, sir, why I talk about competition is I go back to our natural state. Our natural state in Barbados is not facilitation, it's frustration. So we're fixing that. Our natural state is not like Singapore, competitive, it's uncompetitive. So in order to address being uncompetitive, we grant concessions to make ourselves competitive. That's how we're addressing an uncompetitive economy. So we have frustration in an uncompetitive economy, and we are going to seek to fix this through facilitation and concessions, and that's going to solve the problem. Unfortunately, sir, and again, I will stop to remind again all those who are listening to me, I am not speaking of the current government. I am speaking of a systemic issue that we have developed over our lifetime. Perhaps someone will come in here and tell me that it is a leftover artifact of colonial rule, or it's a leftover post-independence issue. I have no idea. I do not have the knowledge to know that. All I can tell you is what I see today, and it has been going on for many years. We have frustration in an uncompetitive economy, and we have facilitation and concessions sought to address that, sought to address those things. But unfortunately, what happens with frustration in an uncompetitive environment, when you have facilitation and concessions, is there's another C word that comes out of it, and that's corruption. And stop for a second, sir. I am not using corruption in the literal definition, which I can read for you, which I am not using it in that. Webster tells us that corruption is dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, typically involved in bribery. I do not mean that, sir. I mean corruption in the sense of the word, where the system is corrupted and you have to find a different way around it. And let's not avoid it. We all know what it's like. You find out that it takes 6 months to get a driver's license, appointment, to get a test. So you got to find a friend that you could call to try and work your way around the system. It is that type of working around the system that I am talking about. When it gets to be the system itself gets corrupted by the players who are trying to get what they would naturally think would be a level of facilitation, but instead they meet frustration, so they try to find ways around. That's the definition I'm using, sir. So, when you have this natural state of frustration and not facilitation, and you have to use concessions to create a competitive market, you in effect are yourself corrupting the system. And that is what I'm hoping, that we can use these calm waters when things are going good, when we know that it's going to be a good tourism season next year, probably. I don't know if there's something else on the horizon. We've got a lot of construction projects. We've got a lot going on. We're punching above our weight on the international market. People are recognizing what's going on in Barbados. We're doing so many good things. Can we take this time to structurally change the economy, remove the frustrations, and just leave the natural state of facilitation? Can we do this? Can we remove the high level of taxes and duties and unnecessary bureaucracy and red tape? Can we do that? I mean, we've all talked about, or I've talked about, and some of you have laughed and agreed with me, about the many different unnecessary things, these silly little things. Remember the weight certificate for the new cars coming from Japan? Have we fixed that? I don't know. I don't know if we have or not. I won't go into all of the ones I've talked about before, but they create friction. Friction is the nemesis of facilitation, and frustration ends up being the outcome from it. Can you imagine, sir, a world without concessions in Barbados, though? What would it look like? It would look like certainty for all businesses. I'm not talking about big businesses, you know. I don't want to hear people come at me about big business or, well, I'm not talking about big business. Because big businesses are the ones who get concessions. The little man don't get concessions, huh? The small man in the street who's trying to build his house over the next 5 or 6 years, he's paying VAT on all his materials. He's paying duty on all of his materials, sir. But the big house, if you're going to bring in foreign exchange, you get concessions. So don't think that I'm talking about big business when I'm talking about concessions. My removal of concessions is across the market to benefit everyone. What you will create is certainty. You will create fairness. There's no application for concessions that go through and have any question as to whether or not this project is going to be viable. You don't have to rely on a decision by somebody. This is going to make sense. You can do it. You can compete. You can compare jurisdiction to jurisdiction or compare investment to investment with certainty. You could focus on other things. You don't need, sir, the labor clauses legislation if you don't have concessions. You don't need this enforcement unit to go and review all of these concessions that were granted and see if people are following, because there is no concessions. We have a competitive environment. Compete. Go ahead. Do your project. The winners and losers at the end of the day, sir, will be decided by the strength of their ideas, the execution, their management, their people. So can you see a vision, sir, for Barbados where its natural state is facilitation? I can, sir. I can see it because I've seen evidence of it. I mentioned the Immigration Department. I can sure that there are other departments. I am absolutely sure as I stand here today that the issues with CAIPO are going to be fixed, sir. I don't know exactly when it's going to be done or how it's going to be done, but I am sure that we have the ability in Barbados to do it because our natural state as people is not to just frustrate processes. That's not what we want to do. We have got to fix this. So I can see it. I can see a world in Barbados where there's facilitation. I can see a world in Barbados with no frustration. And I can see a competitive economy. And I believe, sir, that that is the focus that we should have. So as I said in my opening remarks, this to me is like a steady hand on a tiller. This appropriations bill, I can see exactly where we're going. Some small little things that need tweaking here or there. But generally speaking, let's use this time in a real way to change Barbados to a competitive environment that is based on facilitation. And that, to me, sir, is what the economy, the environment I would like to see for Barbados, for my kids, for your kids, for our grandchildren. And with those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Maladu. Senator Andrew Boyce.
Mr. President, thank you for recognizing me. Good morning to my colleagues. Sir, I've been slightly reflective in the last couple of weeks. The activities of this week have required me so to be. And I think that the appropriation bill and the estimates is reflective of the values of this country. Sir, in the appropriation bill and in the estimates, we see the visioning of a better Barbados, a Barbados that is aimed at the inclusion of persons previously excluded, sir, I speak specifically of persons with disabilities. I speak specifically of children. I speak specifically of the elderly. Let me be clear to make the point that we have treated to these issues in fits and starts on previous occasions, but it requires, sir, that we now transform the realities in the names and in the interests of these vulnerable individuals. And there are quite a number of measures in the estimates and in the plans and programs of the government broadly that do exactly that. So that at the core of these estimates is the notion of a people-centered Barbados and an inclusive Barbados. Sir, in some ways, we are righting historical wrongs and including persons previously excluded. In other ways, we are transforming and modernizing as we must. But at the core of the effort, Mr. President, is the idea that Barbados is made better when we are all included. Sir, the government's work in relation to the vulnerable is perhaps best reflected in the work of the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, although it must be noted that that work cuts across ministries, that there are programs and policies aimed at the improvement of lives and the inclusion of individuals that cuts across all of the ministries of the government. And I will attempt, sir, to highlight those programs and policies for you this morning, but like I said, I will begin with the work of the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs. Sir, there's an urgency. I will begin with child protection, which I think is perhaps some of the most critical work that we see coming out of that ministry. And sir, there's an urgency to the work of safeguarding and protecting our children. Many a government over the years has complained, many a Barbadian citizen has bemoaned the treatment of our children, the absence of the appropriate modern infrastructure for the protection of the nation's children. So, but this government has committed to doing the real work of modernizing the infrastructure. And so we will see very shortly come to this place the culmination of that work in a child protection and child justice bill that updates a centuries-old infrastructure, that modernizes an infrastructure from a time when the relationship between the citizen, particularly in relation to child justice, when the relationship between the citizen and the state was one of power and subjugation. So, and now we are doing better. We are committing to doing better and ridding ourselves, in many ways, of the vestiges of that period, sir. And it is appropriate at this time because I think that at this moment, as we seek to transform and to reposition ourselves, that values gap to which I referred. The idea that we say that we are interested in, we have said for a very long time that we are interested in the protection of children, and that we are concerned with their realities, but the structural realities didn't match our commitments or that which we said. But this government has committed to doing better and to providing an opportunity for individuals to be protected, particularly young people, sir. And the regime does a number of things. It establishes, like I said, a child protection authority, which will provide a new institutional framework to oversee the protection of children. The legislation, which will come to this House shortly, is grounded in the notion that the best interest of the child is a paramount consideration. Simply, sir, at the very core of it, we must keep children safe and away from harm. And if I make comment, sir, and let me just say that this notion of the best interest of the child is not some mystical concept, sir. It is in fact one that is grounded in domestic law and the basic values of this country. And so let us make no mistake in believing that the current system is adequate, or that there is room to emphasize anything other than the protection of our children. In keeping with the new framework, sir, there will be a streamlining of the processes that provide for innovative orders and measures that center and privilege the home environment, that provide support to the family in ensuring, sir, that they can discharge with their duties to their children as best they can. Sir, let us be honest that the intervention of the state may come to be necessary, but it will be, sir, the last resort, that there will be efforts to ensure that children, as far as is possible, are kept in their familial environments, sir. This is one prong, I think, of the transformative work being done by this government in protecting the people of Barbados, beginning first with the youngest of us. Excuse me, sir. And then there's the work being done in the names and in the interest of the elderly. And I have a particular fondness, sir, for older Barbadians. I have a grandmother who is one of the loves of my life. Neighbors and who, like many other Barbadians, helped to raise and rear me, sir, and without whom I would not be standing here. And so the work, similar to the child protection work, aimed at ensuring that the elderly are protected, and particularly protected in an environment in which Barbadian society is aging. We've heard the statistics, sir. And it requires of us to ensure that persons, as they age, continue to be included in society, continue to have access to services, are protected from abuse and ill treatment, and protected from the vagaries of the modern environment, whatever they may be, technological scamming, all of these things that come to really complicate the lives of older Barbadians, sir. The ministry has, in addition to the substantive policy work, and there is a national policy on aging approved by the Cabinet of Barbados, there is also going to be a piece of elderly legislation, sir, that is currently with the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office. And that piece of legislation will ensure that Barbadians, older Barbadians, have equal value and dignity and respect in this society, sir. And that they are protected and that they can continue to contribute. Because I think one of the major misconceptions is that you come to be an older Barbadian and you wish to, or you are required to, diminish your participation in this society, Mr. President. We need all hands on deck in the development of this society. And there are Barbadians who are older, who wish to continue to contribute, having built this society, wish to continue to contribute to the development of Barbados. And this institutional and legal framework permits them the structural realities, sir, for that to be so. Sir, and now I turn to the issue of disability. I will likely spend some time here because that is also a signal part of the work that the ministry is engaging in. And I said I was reflective this week, and perhaps here I want to look back at the lives of persons with disabilities, of those who cared in a society largely ill-equipped to respond to the multiplicity of needs, sir. And when I look back, and reflect on the treatment of persons with disabilities in this society, we have not always, some would tell you ever, lived up to the ideals of the country, sir. But again, this government intends to do better. And in the attempt to do better, sir, the government, as you know, named a National Commission on Disability in June of 2022. And that commission was tasked with doing two things: facilitating the consultations, sir, that would lead to the crafting of National Disability Policy 2023 to 2030, and presenting to the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs a National Disability Bill, a piece of legislation that would, for the first time, provide comprehensive protections for persons with disabilities. I'm delighted to say to you, sir, that after historic consultations, between 60 and 70 meetings of people with disabilities across the length and breadth of this country, members of the private sector, members of the church, members of the trade unions, members of the political parties, all that we have a policy, and that policy was approved by the Cabinet of Barbados on the 21st of September, 2023. Sir, I have resisted the urge on previous occasions to delve into the specifics of the policy out of an appreciation that there will come a time that it will come here, sir. But I think it's important to give some indication of its provisions, to frame the broader work of the government of Barbados on this issue, and to perhaps frame some of the the estimates and commitments that we heard recently. The policy covers 14 policy areas to include, sir, education, transportation, sports and culture, employment. It covers a span of issues, sir. Women and girls, given their specific vulnerabilities as well. And sir, the policy is broken down into short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals over the span of those 7 years. And I want to make the point before I get into the specifics of the provisions that this is culture-shifting work. I said earlier that we haven't always lived up to our ideals in relation to the treatment of persons with disability. And so we are coming from a long way behind. And this work will not be easy work. In some ways, sir, it will not be fast work because we are shifting culture in many ways. We're moving from a society where persons with disabilities were relegated to the margins of our society, sir. And the first part of that work that is necessary is public awareness, and that work has begun. And very soon you will see a robust communications campaign rolled out to continue to engage Barbadians on their role in making this a better Barbados for persons with disabilities. Because, like I said, it will take all of us. It will take the person with a disability, it will take the teacher, it will take the member of the church, it will take all of us to shift culture in relation to persons with disabilities and to establish and give life to the framework articulated by the government of Barbados. And I say the government of Barbados, but it really is a framework facilitated by the government of Barbados and contributed to heavily by persons with disabilities and their caregivers, sir, who for a long time have felt that they did not have a space in this society. I turn now to some of the substantive provisions of the policy, sir. Pardon me. Sir, in relation to I begin with employment. Out of an appreciation, sir, that employment is one of the bugbears of the community of persons with disabilities. The current statistic suggests that 90% of persons with disabilities in this country are unemployed. It is a devastating statistic, sir. And when you look at it at the micro level, it is a statistic that impedes the aspirations and the actualization of persons with disabilities. There are persons with disabilities who, I don't think it needs to be said, have acumen and prowess to contribute to the development of this society, sir. But by virtue of their disability, they are not considered, sir. They do not have the opportunity to contribute and to, I talk about contribution at the national level, but also, so sir, to support themselves, because we all in this chamber appreciate the utility of employment and how it contributes to a feeling of fulfillment, sir. And it is not a feeling that in the main, the community of persons with disabilities have enjoyed. And it is something that we have to alleviate, sir. And how do we plan to do that? The policy says, I'll give you some indication of what it says. The policy talks about the establishment of regulatory systems to ensure that employers have or develop work environments free of discrimination, sir, on the basis of disability. Sir, we must also ensure that persons with disabilities have the ability to be accommodated in the workplace and to do things like work from home. And all of that, sir, requires comprehensive workplace policies on the issues of disability and the issues of accommodation, sir. I smile because I think it was only a few short years ago that we could not conceive of things like working from home. And we could not conceive of, prior to COVID, giving persons with disabilities the ability to work from their own environments with access to their own accommodations. And now, sir, work from home is so much a part of who we are and so much a part of how we think of the possibilities in the corporate world, sir, that it is almost laughable. It is nothing if not ironic, sir. So on the issue of education, sir, which is another major issue for persons with disabilities, because the reality is that our education system is largely still segregated on the basis of disability. Persons with disabilities go to particular institutions in the main, and persons without disabilities go to other institutions in the main. And we have to consider the extent to which such a segregation in our education system limits the possibilities for persons with disabilities. We must also do things like, and have committed to doing things like providing the aids and accommodations for persons with disabilities in the context of the classroom, sir. And I was delighted to hear recently of the 75% tax credit for the provision of education and life skills, facilities providing education and life skills, sir, because that is a part of our education system that we have to build out. We have considered for a long time the realities of the traditional education system, but we also have to broaden our conception and our support for these institutions that may support individuals not only in the garnering of some academic skill, sir, but also in the development of life skills. And of course, this Parliament supported the Autism Association earlier this year with a facility that permits them to provide that training, sir. There is a sentiment, and perhaps I should respond to it here. There is a sentiment. Let me first say that we're having this conversation about education of special needs individuals in the context of a broader conversation about education reform, sir. And there is a sentiment that I have heard expressed about the extent to which we should, I think, not trouble our education system, that we should go only so far as curricula and no further, sir. Because some argue that the education system has served us well. Let me be very clear, Mr. President. The education system in Barbados has not served persons with disabilities well. This idea that we should go as far as curricula and no further ignores things like the physical plans and the accommodations that we have to make in revamping our physical plans. So the existing schools, many of them, were not constructed for persons with disabilities. I do not speak about this, sir, in the abstract. I recall, I told you I was a little bit reflective this week. I recall on the eve of CSEC exams, deciding to use a wheelchair because of some medical challenges. And there were parts of the school that I went to that I could not go, sir. I remember writing in my lap and on the side of desk for a couple of days. I remember a member of staff saying to my parents, maybe y'all should build him a desk. Sir, it goes farther than curriculum. Education reform in the name and in the interest of persons with disabilities is a moral imperative, sir, if we do not do it. Forgive my emotion, Mr. President.
Take your time. We're all here emotional with you.
Whoa, I didn't. Oh. I think also of the children with disabilities, children on the autism spectrum, and who have other challenges, sir, who require an aid in the classroom, require that their teachers be trained in the issues of disability, in the issues of instructing persons on the autism spectrum, may need some degree of accommodations in relation to things like extra time and things like larger print. Again, I say, it goes farther than curriculum. Enough said. Sir, we must develop in this country an understanding of the totality of the individual. And some of the work that the ministry is doing in relation to the amalgamation of the entities, the National Disabilities Unit, the National Assistance Board, the Welfare Department, and the Child Care Board into a single family services institution. It's part of recognizing the needs of people. It is a part, again, sir, of putting people at the center of government and governance. Sir, we know the perennial complaints about the provision of social services. Processes that take too long, the delivery of service that doesn't reflect, like I said, the totality of the individual before a particular agency, sir. And this amalgamation does a number of things to ensure that we mitigate against those perennial concerns. We bring services closer to the people so that you will see satellite institutions across the country that will provide services in all of the areas that I have referred to. Because again, sir, consider the current reality. Consider the reality of a person with a disability who needs the services of the Child Care Board. Because again, realities intersect, identities intersect. In the current environment, they would have to go, sir, from one part of Bridgetown to the other. They would have to, sir, engage with the multiple agencies, registering multiple times, and doing things that are genuine disincentives to seeking the assistance that is required. And so the government of Barbados, in its commitment to do better, says we are bringing the services to you We are amalgamating those services so that you, when you engage with the social services, that we don't say to someone with multiple issues who may require the services of more than one institution, well, you have to go to them, sir, because it leads to a situation where sometimes you go nowhere. You go back to your house and you try to carry the burden by yourself. The government of Barbados is saying, we are helping you through this reform to carry the burdens that you may have. Sir, so that we will see satellite centers across the island, like I indicated. I think they're proposed to be 21 satellite centers in Bentham's in St. Lucie and in Spikestone and in Sion Hill and in Belle Plaine. Some of them existing centers, others of them to be added. Perhaps, I note, sir, that all of the ones I called just now, all of my examples are northern, but you will forgive me my northern bias. There will also be some in St. Michael and St. Thomas and Christchurch. Sir, the estimates has provided an opportunity for us, like I said, to vision a better Barbados and to reflect on what we've achieved so far and what our aspirations for a better Barbados must include. I say always that the social progress of this country has been mechanized by the ability to look at people and to say, though your burdens are not mine, though I do not know personally that which burdens you, I will participate in the alleviation of your woes. And long, long, long shall it remain so, Mr. President. Sir, in my emotion, I just realized that in my emotion, I negated to mention something that I heard in the estimates process, a commitment by the government, sir, to expand the categories of persons who will benefit from the non-contributory pensions of the NIS. In those, let's return to the consultations a moment. In those consultations, the parents of children with disabilities called, sir, for that kind of expansion. But not only did it happen there, sir, while I may appear to be young, I recall well that advocates for persons with disabilities for many, many, many years have been calling for the expansion of those categories, sir. Some of them no longer with us. And so it was with a degree of pride and, sir, that I noted that expansion. But let me say this. There was some initial concern over the absence, or what was perceived to be the absence of Down syndrome from the categories explicitly listed, sir. As I have indicated, the government of Barbados is prepared to take a comprehensive approach to the broadening of those categories and the provisioning for persons with disabilities. There is no reason to fear. In the regulations that will give life and legal effect to that statement, sir, persons with Down syndrome, will be included. The other thing that we heard recently is the additional buses that will be added to the fleet of the National Disabilities Unit. Sir, there is a commitment to, last year, 2 new buses, 2 years ago, my apologies, 2 new buses were added. And 2 more buses will be added in the coming financial year. And may not seem like persons without disabilities, members of the public may well say, okay, that's nice. Those buses provide transportation to persons with disabilities in a context where they have to pay exorbitant fees to private transportation providers, sir, to do things like go to the doctor and go to school. This is, of course, in the context of the fact that we now have a fleet of buses that are more accessible to persons with disabilities. But there are disabilities and illnesses, sir, that because of the realities of those challenges, that you prefer more discreet transportation. And sir, those buses at the National Disabilities Unit carry people weekly with disabilities to their doctor's appointments. They aid in taking them to school. Sir, they make a difference in this country. And the additional 2 buses, those additional 2 buses will make the world of a difference in the lives of some people in this country, and I wish to commend the government. It may seem small, but such is the work of transformation. It is the small things. Sir, we will not get here, and let me make the point that we will not get to an inclusive, fully accessible Barbados that makes accommodations for each and every person with a disability in the blink of an eye, sir. But it is necessary work. It is real work. And it is work that the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs is committed to and has shown their commitment, certainly in the last year, certainly in the last 2 years, in having facilitated, sir, some of the important work and progress that we have made on this issue. I ask all of Barbados, though, to join the ministry and to join persons with disabilities in this work, and to, in your small corners, contribute to Barbados being better for persons with disabilities. We have a long way to go. But I think that the Barbadian spirit always is to commit to the task and to bit by bit engage in making realities better for people. It is the Barbadian way, sir. And on this issue of disability and on this issue of inclusion, sir, may we be faithful to that tradition. The work around disability will require, sir, that we do things like expand our conceptions of the definition of disability. For a very long time in this country, we have taken disability to mean bodily dysfunction. So you can't walk, or you can't see, or you can't speak. The law and policy, Mr. President, grounds, establishes and gives life to a more expansive definition. One that recognizes that sometimes the disability may be invisible. One that recognizes, sir, that the disability may require different accommodations and different aids at different times, sir. And I make this point intentionally because our social policy interventions up to this point have been grounded in a particular definition of disability. Right? You think of our exempt riders policy at the Transport Board, or you think of the very categories that exist at the NIS. And there was in those consultations some legitimate concern about how we would define disability. Because even in the context of the disabled community, there was consternation, given the lived experience of persons with disabilities over the years, that maybe they will, all of this will happen, but maybe they will still not benefit, sir, because we will define disability in a particular way. Let me say that the definition is expansive. It is reflective of both modern social policy and, to the extent necessary, modern medicine, sir. So again, fear not. The policy and the law will reflect the realities of persons with disabilities and will seek to alleviate those burdens, to help Barbadians with disabilities be more included, be more empowered, and benefit from a greater degree of enfranchisement. Sir, I keep saying we have a long way to go because it is true. But we've also come a long way. And that too, sir, must be commended. I want to specifically commend the members of what is called the Hinkson Commission, the individuals who travels the length and breadth of this country and who met with anyone who would meet with us and others in the crafting of this national disability policy and this comprehensive piece of legislation. So I want to specifically commend them for their commitment to the crafting of a better Barbados. Sir, the work of transformation is never easy. It is likely never swift. But my hope, and certainly the hope of the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, is that future generations of Barbadians will come to know Barbados, where the realities of which we complain as persons with disabilities do not exist. That they will look at a 2024, that they will look at a 1999, that they will look back at Barbados of this period and say, oh, what a time it must have been. Oh, thank God it doesn't exist anymore. Mr. President, that vision of a better Barbados is evidenced in these estimates through multiple policies and multiple initiatives. And thus, I commend these estimates to you and ask that Barbadians join us in the heavy lifting of making this country better, safer, and more inclusive for every Barbadian. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Andre Boyce. Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I begin my own presentation, I would just like to congratulate the last speaker, Senator Boyce, and what was a really incisive and indeed decisive presentation representing the people with disabilities in our community. I could see that he was speaking from right here. And I wish to congratulate you and to assure you that I look forward to those bits of legislation of which you spoke coming to this chamber and being able to support you in seeing them go onto our statute books. Mr. President, you know, every year we receive these huge books, and I think this is probably only half of it. There's also another one. And of course, we open them and, you know, we start to delve in them and see, well, what is the expenditure budgeted for the next year? What is the revenue expected to be? And of course, we look and we see there's a deficit. We look to see who has been allocated what in terms of funds to be able to carry out their programs in their particular areas. Of course, one of the important things is that deficit. And we notice this year it is just only, it is over, just over, I think, $1 billion. As you know, in a different life, of course, or former life, I should say, you, both yourself and I, we tend to like to look at numbers. And of course, when we see a deficit, we look next to see, well, how will we finance it? Of course, it's a matter of arithmetic. You're going to finance it either by borrowing, you're going to finance it either by increasing tax revenues or other revenues or levies. You can finance it by maybe adjusting some expenditures. But the point is, we know that at the end of the day, the gap has to be closed. So obviously, I look to see how it is proposed that that gap will be closed this year. So I turn to the statement of cash flows on page 12 and to see how it will be financed. Other than from out of the revenues collected, we see that we have cash flows from, we will get cash flows from borrowings amounting to $1.049 billion, which is the deficit for the year, really. It almost equates to the deficit for the year. So 100% of our deficit is going to be financed, it seems to me, by borrowings. Since, of course, we have heard that subsequent to laying these, we got the assurance from the Prime Minister during the course of her budget presentation that there will be no new taxes. That doesn't mean that taxes won't increase, of course, because as we expect growth in the economy, we expect that you will there will be some more collection
So revenue.
of taxes arising from those profits which will be generated. So and we know that corporation tax, for example, as was announced as early as December last year, will actually see an adjustment. In a lot of cases, 9% more. For most companies, we will be moving from about 5% to 9%. So that in itself will be part of the reason why there should be an expectation of increased tax revenues. So I have no difficulty. Well, I have no difficulty as long as at the end of the day, once having financed that deficit by borrowings, we have the ability going forward, when called upon to repay the debt, that we have that ability so to do. And within the last few years, we have heard of the significant amount or the buildup of our foreign reserves, which of course would allow us to service that debt when the time to, or to repay that debt when the time comes. We hear, of course, also about the debt to GDP ratio. And we are told that, everything is good, everything is going in the right direction, and there's not an issue. So again, we are pleased. We are happy to know that we don't have to look down the road and find that there may be some issues relating to our financing that will require our urgent attention as we did in 2018. There is one item connected to all of this, though, Mr. President, which I just wanted to touch on, because during the presentations yesterday, I think it was, I took this big book up, and I was just, again, as I said, because of my numbers thing, I was looking at some numbers, and one of the things I looked at would have been the debt service ratio. And I know that there are various measurements of debt service ratio. I know debt to GDP is one, which is the one that is nearly always talked about. But of course, there's also the debt to revenue ratio, which gives us an idea about the liquidity of government. And so I did a little calculation, and I noticed in 2021, 22, that ratio, that debt service ratio, in terms of breaking it down in terms of the interest repayments, 15%, in terms of the amortization payments, 14%, so overall 29% debt service ratio. In 2022, 23, the interest payments will be 15.9% of the revenue, the amortization payments 19.2% of the revenue, given an overall 35.1% of revenue, or 35.1% debt service ratio. In 2023-24, the interest payments moved from 19.8 up to 19.8%, the amortization up to 20.5%, given an overall 40.3 percentage debt service ratio. That is based on the revised estimates for 2023-2024. And in the projected estimates for 2024-25, we see interest payments will be 20.7% of revenues, giving us that ratio, and amortization payments will be 23.8% of revenues, giving an overall debt service of 44.5%. So the point is, over the period 22, the debt service ratio has gone from 29.0% to 35.1% to 40.3%, projected in the next year to 44.5%. Overall, you may ask, well, so what's the significance? What I want to point out is really more important, the trend, because it has been going up and up over the last 4 years. It's been increasing. And usually, when you see that happen, one has to begin to worry a little bit about your liquidity and your solvency situation. Not trying to frighten the public or put anybody on notice that there are some such significant issues which is down the corner. But it is important to note that, because what happens is that as that ratio increases, it is going to crowd out the funds which are available to allocate to your current expenditure. It is going to prevent you from being able to do all of the other things that you would have wished to do in terms of your education reform and in terms of your housing projects and so on. So I'm just saying that is also an important number to look at, to keep an eye on, and to make sure that if it seems to be going out of proportion, which is not manageable, that we take early steps to try and pull back and do what is necessary to keep the management of our fiscal management on an easy level. And I also, just while I'm at it, just wanted to make one other comment as well. In terms of the projected cash flow statement, I would suggest that in future, going forward, if comparative figures could be added, I would suggest comparative figures being added to the statement, which helps, of course, again, in your analysis, because, again, you're looking to see what is happening from year to year and how things are changing and and looking to see why they're changed. And, of course, as accountants, we know that in presenting reports and statements anyhow, we always like to put in the comparative information. So that is pretty standard in the accounting field. So, and this would have helped, rather than having to go back and say pull the previous big book from last year to see what were the differences and so on. Yeah. Not a big issue, but it's something that perhaps the persons who prepare could take to take into consideration. Mr. President, I really don't intend to be exceedingly long. I'm not going to take an hour for sure. You know, in terms of my contribution, but I just want to look at a few areas for which I have concerns. I've been hearing things about, but I'm not sure that I really have been satisfied with every answer or response that has been forthcoming. For example, Mr. President, last year it was announced that government would be moving away from giving the subsidies or subsidizing the sugar industry. That whole sector was to be reformed. I get the impression government was looking to divest itself of the industry and get out of it and leave it to the private investors. I have no difficulty with that. As a matter of fact, I always laud actions when I see government getting out of projects such as this, which essentially are commercial, or should be anyway, which essentially require a business process to see that they are properly managed and to ensure that government funds are not effectively being poured down the drain. We have been told, and I've read it in the press by the Minister of Agriculture, that I believe the subsidy last year, 2023, which was the last subsidy, which was the last subsidy provided, would have been in the region of 30 million. So that saves the government $30 million. It is the industry effectively then is being handed over to private enterprise like it used to be back in the 60s and 70s. And so I think there's a company called the Barbados Energy and Sugar Industry Company, which has been established. And of course, there's the Barbados Business, the Agricultural Business Company. I think there are two, yes, you're correct. There are two of them being established, which is going to be taking this project forward. But my concern, my concern is that I often wonder, and I hear what some of the things that have been said. It's no longer a sugar industry. It's supposed to be an energy industry. Sugar is not going to be effectively just like a byproduct of that energy industry. But I am old-fashioned. I really often wonder, $30 million, which has had to be put into this industry over the years. I don't know how this is going to be suddenly turned around into some profitable entity that will not be looking to government down the line to be able to subsidize any deficits. So I really am interested in hearing from the players involved now. What is what is the strategic plan for this industry? that they're going to turn the sugarcane fields into PV, both PV systems and general all electricity. Well, they stay in sugar, but certainly, if they do, are there any plans to expand the acreage in the industry? Because surely the amount of bagasse which comes off as a byproduct of the milling of sugarcane is not going to be enough to generate electrical energy over a year. We know that that happens over a couple of weeks during the crop season, and sometimes there's even some difficulty in having that amount of cane fuel, fiber, or bagasse, I think they call it, available to keep the factories running. So I really wish them well. I think as a proud Barbadian, I would like to see that these private sector enterprises can take this project over, run with it, and make it profitable again. I am not going to hold my breath that's going to happen this year or next year or the next year. And that is why I said earlier, I really would like to see the strategic plan, which says how this will be achieved within, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years, which is the sort of horizon that I expect it will take if this ever becomes a profitable venture. I don't know where the financing of the new entity is coming from to capitalize to capitalize these companies. And I think that would be, of course, interested to see as well how this whole thing comes together. So there are a lot of things that I think would be useful for all of us as the public and to be able to understand how this industry is going to go forward. Because one thing I don't want to see happening, Mr. President, is that, after 5 years, you suddenly, these entities suddenly realize they can't do what they set out to do. And then you have all the sugarcane, the fields around the island, growing grass or, the bushes that you get around this time, you want that.
Coach. Coach.
The courage and so on that, and that they sort of run to ruin. So it is important that we understand what is planned, that it makes sense, because not just putting numbers down on a bit of paper is going to be the answer unless it is something which is workable and sensible. And so I would like to encourage those people involved in that sector who will be carrying the project forward, as well-intentioned as they are. I will just wish them all the best as they move forward. Mr. President, while I am on this area, which is this area, effectively, which is dealing with agriculture, I just wanted to make 2 other little points regarding this industry. One is that last year, towards the end of last year, we were hearing quite a few murmurings about the unavailability of chicken and its products. And I mean, I go into the supermarket from time to time. So I do a little shopping and a little cooking also. So, and when you walk through those sections, those frozen food sections, you recognize that most of the shelves, and this is not just this is in the big supermarkets, and the mini, it was all over. Very few, those shelves which would normally, you would have seen packed up with fresh products, poultry products and so on, were really looking very sparse. And as a matter of fact, I recall one of the supermarket retailers, in fact, more than one, coming out and saying, look, I don't know what's going on with the poultry industry, but when I order a certain amount, I can only get 40% of my order, or 50% of my order, or whatever the case may be. And then we were hearing some people in the industry saying, but there's no problem. There's availability of poultry products. So they sort of getting like mixed mixed feelings coming back of really what is the situation. Now we know that we had issues with heat stress at some point last year in the in the industry, and so that presumably would have had some impact as well. But I'm raising this issue because I think that Barbados, in general, our poultry producers and so on, have invested a substantial amounts of investments in order to bring the industry to the point where it was, where effectively we were self-sufficient in poultry and supplying the markets, except of course for the chicken wings that don't care what you do, so that they can still be imported because Bajans like the chicken wings. So but that was the stage where we had reached an industry which I thought was getting to the level of maturity, which we would then be looking to take off and start to look at even doing some exports in some of our Caribbean territories. So I make all that point to say I don't want to see, I would really wish not to see a situation where the industry starts to decline. And I would encourage government to continue to throw every support that is necessary to keep that industry alive and well and flourishing. The other thing I wanted to speak to is the dairy industries. And I think the Prime Minister, I believe it was, did mention during her budget presentation of some help which is on the cards for the dairy industry. I believe it was, she mentioned that there would be some ease in terms of the importation of in-calf cows into the industry, which would of course have the effect of replenishing the industry, which would of course help to improve the genetics, because too often one of the issues in the livestock industry in Barbados is that you tend to do a fair amount of inbreeding and so the quality of your production is not going to increase unless you can improve that genetics. And again, we had a dairy industry which was flourishing. From all reports, that industry, Mr. President, has also had its share of issues. And so I hope that this promised support, along with any support which the government may see fit going forward to throw behind the poultry industry, to keep it a viable industry, that will happen. And our agricultural sector will be able to be kept buoyant. And, you know, we had in our Senate Dr. Obrafe, who drummed into us on every occasion he got an opportunity to get up and speak, whether it was purely on agriculture or not, and he could slip in some, thing about the importance of food security. And I benefited from that, and I think that it would really be laudable to see if that all of what he has been saying, or many of the things that he has been preaching, we will be able to implement over time and be able to see the importance at the level, as this she says, of having a secure food sector. Mr. President, I next want to just speak on the question of housing. The Ministry of Housing, of course, has its allocation in here, the Ministry of Housing. But the whole question of housing in Barbados is right now we have the Ministry of Housing, which is the parent ministry. We have the National Housing Corporation. We have the UDC. We have the UDC, which is Urban Development Corporation. You have the Rural Development Corporation, and now we have the newest entity called HOPE. And I'm not certain what the overall relationship is between all of these entities. I am not here to speculate, but I think that for clarity, I would wish that we could be told what is the future of these various entities. Is the Ministry of Housing being phased out? Is Hope to take over all of the operating activities of constructing houses and so on? Is the Ministry of Housing is the Housing Authority now not going to be doing any construction of houses, but maybe just become a collector of rents from the housing estates? I don't know. But we think that overall, I think the time has come to look at all of these entities with a critical eye to determine if this is the best governance structure or organization for the Ministry of Housing. If we need to make further changes, or maybe look at amalgamating the UDC and the ADC, the urban, rural, housing, maybe, I don't know. But we need to take a long, serious look and analysis and see what is the sensible, workable, and best solution overall for being able to provide that housing service, which is vital for this country. I heard the Prime Minister in her presentation, I believe it was, may have been in the wrap-up, in her budget presentation in the wrap-up, said or acknowledged that there are issues. Specifically, she mentioned the whole project, there are issues, and that she would be setting up, or she would be requiring an investigation into how it is operating. But I don't know who will do the investigation. I don't know if the Auditor General or some special consultancy firm or whatever, whoever will be doing the investigation. But I would suggest that just beyond looking at what may be some issues which may come to light, that they look further and maybe be tasked with the responsibility of recommending a new structure or whatever for that whole housing sector. And of course, we also have to be realistic. We have been here that it is the intention of government to build 10,000 houses in over a 5-year period. Approximately averages out at 2,000 a year. And maybe it's time now you pull back and ask yourself, is this really a realistic number? Are we going about trying to reach this number in the right way? Because it seems to me that having set that up as an objective, we haven't gone very far in achieving the objective. So there's no harm in saying, halt, stop. There's an issue. We do have some issues here. Let us look at this thing again. Let us see what can work. If we can produce 200 or 300 houses a year, it makes better sense than to keep saying we're going to be doing 2,000 houses a year, and then at the end of the year we hear, you only produce 100 and whatever houses. I remember a time, and that would have been, I think, back in the 80s, 70s or 80s perhaps, when some huge housing developments would have been done in this country. And I know that I'm sitting right next to, or standing right next to, a former minister of housing. So I'm going to have to be careful. I don't remember if that former minister would have been minister at the time. But the point I want to emphasize on is that we had a huge project done. And when we say the Barbados, a huge project done in Oxnard. Several lots in Oxnard and in Husbands. And how that was done is that we invited, it wasn't done by the National Housing Corporation, you invited private developers and you allocated them lots to build X amount of houses. You allocated another private developer to build X amount of houses and another developer. I think there were probably about 3 or 4 developers who were working at the time in the area. And that is probably one of the better executed projects that were done, certainly that I can think of and that was way back then. The Ministry of Housing and the Housing Authority would have played their part in terms of, the overall management of the project, because it was a huge project. If you can imagine all these dozens, or literally hundreds of houses going up at the same time and managing three or 4 individual contractors. So they played their part in terms of the overall management, in terms of seeing that certain standards were maintained, and that the costs of these houses were kept in line with what the government's policy at the time would have been for providing housing for lower and middle income persons. I'm not suggesting that that is the solution to the issue now. I'm just saying that that is what happened at the time. And I can remember very well, with your permission, I just called the company's name. I remember Ideal Homes, for example, was one of those contractors. And they had a substantial amount of experience in doing those sort of projects, having worked at projects in various parts of Christchurch, in Lowlands, in Durance. I think they would have done some in Durance, Plum Grove, and some other areas, and all around. And the other contractors as well were very experienced in providing that level of housing for the lower and middle income persons in our community. And I tell you, it is not an easy or straightforward thing to do, to be able to build those houses, bring them in at a reasonable cost, and be able to make a profit on them. In actual fact, the margins on houses for middle and lower income persons tend to be very, very small. Profit margins are very small. And so if you mess up in some area, or you do something wrong, you come out, the contractor can come out, making some fairly significant losses. So when we look at government's policy, which is on the table, I think that is something, again, the government may wish to look at and to see how using that kind of approach, which was effectively like a public-private partnership, how that could be worked into getting this solution solved as to how we get those 2,000 houses per year up. Just wanted, now it comes into my mind, just to mention one other project, but this is not in terms of housing now, but in terms of the Ministry of Transport and Works, as it is now called. And it is just to say that I detect from going around and driving around in Barbados in recent times that there is a significant amount of work seems to be going on in terms of this, I think they call it milling and paving of roads. And we have been crying out for quite a while for these bad roads. I particularly want to mention a specific road, the road from, and I'm sure Senator Rogers would know this road and some others, the road from Salters Junction to the Constance roundabout, which has been repaved. I mean, that road was atrocious. It has been repaved. But I raised that to make the point that the quality of work done along that road was outstanding. And I can say that because I have traveled on some other roads just repaved, but you drive 10 meters and you're dropping into a manhole because the covers are not level with the road.
Exactly.
Really bad, really bad work. That was and still is a problem along Highway 1.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I think that if we are going to expend this level of expenditure in terms of providing that kind of roads for our people, we have to do it right. We have to make sure that they take a leaf out of the book of whoever, I don't know who the contractor was, but whoever did that stretch. I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed with it. And in fact, when I drove it, probably the first time, I had to keep an eye on my speedometer because your foot tends to, go down a little heavy. And so I would really like to see it kept up, but as I said, with that kind of quality. And government needs to insist on that quality roads. Perhaps what may be necessary is to have some retention, which at the end of the paving, and you have those issues that will not be released to the contractor until they're rectified. But I encourage the ministry as far as they can and as far as their financing would allow to continue the good work of, we've been crying out for too long now. And persons have had all kinds of problems with their vehicles, problems with the suspension and so on. I've experienced this. I've had to replace certain parts on my pickup truck. So I know what it was. And so I'm happy. I'm happy with that road, but do the others to that level, to that standard of quality. Mr. President, I next want to just touch on Ministry of Education. I tried to watch a little bit, as far as I could, when the whole question of the estimates were being debated in the other place. And, the ministers had to go in to the well along with all of their senior officers and give account. I don't remember saying the Ministry of Education. I don't know if they were called or what. That is probably a bit unfortunate because I think when I look into these estimates, the Ministry of Education has, I believe, maybe the second or third largest allocation of funds. That's like 651 million, which is allocated for 24, 2025. And so it would have been good to be able to hear from those persons what their plans are and how they're going to execute their plans in the coming year, and how they can assure the public that that $651 million is going to be well and truly spent. And there have been several problems in the ministry, so that's not an open secret. You read them, you take up the newspaper on a daily basis, and you see, I don't know, parents kept their children home because of the school is in bad shape. You see teachers, decided to stay home because of some environmental issue. I remember even one situation where a general worker fell through the floor of a classroom. And, they always see, there are all these issues. And I don't know what is the problem. I don't know who is responsible for the school plan. I don't know if it's the school boards. I don't know if it's the ministry. But clearly, every year, almost perennially now, there are these maintenance issues. And I don't want anybody to get up and tell me, but we have some maintenance expenses allocated here in the budget. I can read, so I can see them. So the question is really, is it a question of management not looking after the plan? Is a question of whoever the responsible individuals are not taking responsibility for ensuring that the plant is maintained? In fact, I suspect that what may be the major issue is that the amount of funds allocated may be insufficient. And so, with all of what is happening in the ministry, with the education reform, with all of these having to deal on a daily basis with all of these various issues, I have taken up or I've seen the chief education officer on television. From time I've seen the chief education officer reporting on in the press on some of these issues. And sometimes I feel sorry. I feel sorry for the chief education officer. Because it seems that she has to go home and lay in her bed every night with a whole level of problems, on her chest, which she has to resolve. And I don't know, maybe as part of the overall education reform, maybe we should look to see if the current management of the whole education system is fit for the purpose for which we are moving our education system forward. But it needs a serious look at, because it really makes no sense. Every day you look in your paper and there's something wrong at the ministry, something that has to be corrected, some issue. And so I don't know what the answer is, but certainly I think that we should take the time as we go through all the other processes with the reform and whatever else, that we look at how this service is being provided. Mr. President, I also just want to touch on something which is not specifically the forte of the Ministry of Education, but certainly connected to the extent that it involves our youth. I'm speaking specifically about the situation where for, I don't know how many years now, it's probably, the number of years now is probably at the stage where you can say donkey years, as the old folk used to say, that we have been talking about doing a new stadium to allow our athletes to be able to do all of the things that they have to do and to be able to perform at the level which makes them competitive with the region and with the world. 16? Lot of years, so they're really donkey, so that's donkey years. But, and this is something that I believe I spoke to when we discussed in here the sports, the whole plan that the Ministry of Sports had for the development of sports in the country. And we have been hearing for all that long time that there is a new stadium is going to be constructed. Since then, we've heard about mini stadia. We've heard about, all other things, community fields and whatever else. But we seem to not to be getting nowhere fast in terms of that stadium, which more than one government, which more than one administration has promised. And I'm raising this point now because I believe it may have been just a week or two ago, I read in the press where our athletes who are preparing to go to the Carifta Games this weekend, because Carifta Games is held over the Easter weekend, they went down to St. Vincent to train because they did not have the opportunity over the last year or two to be able to train on the velodrome services, which they're going to be running on when they go down to Carifta. They've been running on grass surfaces. And so they went down to get a little practice, a little training to acclimatize themselves, and they had to do it in St. Vincent. I really have a difficulty with that. Disappointed that we are at that stage where we have to go after another CARICOM country to be able to train for our sports. And I think that I want again to emphasize the importance of putting that facility in place for our children. Mr. President, I have some other points I want to make, but I see that time is running out, and therefore I'm going to wrap up.
Just a 1
at this
minute
point.
wrap up, please.
I trust that we will take to heart all of the comments that have been made by the various senators, and that as government moves forward, they take them into consideration, and wherever possible, seek to have them as part of our overall policies going forward. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. You said you were going to be brief, and you batted for 1 hour and 30 seconds. No, 30 seconds. I come to you. You know, I'll put it on here, 35, 137. Cummings, you're missing the public.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to call for the suspension of the sitting of the Senate for the lunch break and to have the Senate reconvene at 3 p.m. this afternoon.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 3 p.m. today. Will all honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The things the ayes have it. The sitting is suspended until 3 p.m. today.